our next session is Bharat Witnessing Amrit Kaal. We invite on stage Professor Gautam Desiraju, scientist and author, Prasenjit Basu, economist, author of Asia Reborn, Ashok Chowgule, Vice President, Vishwa Hindu Parishad, India, and contributing moderator, Monika Halan, personal finance writer, author, and speaker.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the session on Is India Witnessing Amrit Kaal? I want to start with a very small personal story. I grew up in Delhi in India of the 1970s and 80s. And I have to remember, as a child, you just take what is given. But the memories etched very deep are of standing in lines for milk, for water. There used to be one phone in 100 flats. There used to be maybe 5 cars in a very middle-class colony. We were all, our parents were professionals, university professors, government servants. So it wasn't like a poor cohort of people. It was a middle-class India. And the memory is really of less. Everything was less. Everything was a line. There was no quality to products. You had to stand in line even to pay your bills. That was socialist India. That was an India which changed irrevocably in 1991. In my opinion, that is when Amrit Kaal, first seeds of economic Amrit Kaal began. So my definition, and I'm going to go to the panel and ask for definitions of Amrit Kaal, because we have a very eclectic group of people who will bring to this discussion different windows through which we will examine this concept of Amrit Kaal. So for me, Amrit Kaal is really this transformation from the socialist mindset of poverty is good to this India today where there is a sense of abundance, there is a sense of plenty. And even for those who don't have, the aspiration has been kindled. So my definition of Amrit Kaal will be that place in the time of a nation when it is good to aspire to be rich. Being rich is not being bad. You can become rich by being good things. You can be paying your taxes. You can be spending on things which are important to you. And the entire ecosystem which makes a country think different thoughts is participative in that. So that's the way that I am defining Amrit Kaal. But I'm going to wait starting with you, Ashok ji, maybe just we take literally 2 to 3 minutes each to define what do we think of what is Amrit Kaal for you.
Thank you. I think overall the definition that you set out, I think is should be the one that we should have on our particular forum, this discussion. One thing I'll add as a businessman who has had to deal with so many particular issues, control issues, right from the time I started to work in 1975. I would like to add one particular thing that we talk about ease of doing business in the true sense. I think today what is being talked about ease of doing business is how do you set up a company fast and how do you close it if you have to close it, how do you close it quickly? But in between, what is to be done is something that is not much talked about. I would like to add that one feature.
Okay, so basically you're saying that the ease of doing business is also a very deep part of Amrit Kaal. Is that what I'm hearing? One of the parts of... Okay. Gautam ji.
Thank you. Thank you, Monika ji. And to continue a little bit on what you said, I grew up in Bombay of the 1960s. So maybe a decade before you. And the only bright spot was Lakshman's cartoons every morning in the Times of India. And there was one which I remember. There are some people standing in the queue, and then This common man is there, he's just looking on and somebody is coming. So he's saying, what queue is this? So the guy tells him, we don't know what queue it is. There are some people standing here, so come and join us and stand in the queue. So, this is what I am reminded of. But fast forwarding till today, if you take Amrit or Amritam, this is, for me, it would be a end point, not the start point. So I think that I can smell Amrit Kaal now, but I don't taste it as yet.
Your definition, like how should we think about Amrit Kaal? I am thinking of it purely in economic terms.
I would think of it in geo-strategic terms. I want India to be definitely one of the two most powerful countries in the world. So I don't know whether we may be one or number two, I don't care. And who is number one if we are two, I don't care. But I want to be, in real terms, not even, PPP terms. In real terms, we should be number one and number two.
And power will come from GDP?
It will come partly from GDP, but it's not enough. I think we need more towards the dharmic side and the constitution and so on.
Okay, we'll come to that.
Yes.
Yes. Again,
but GDP is a sine qua non. It is,
we're agreeing. I think the panelists.
Poverty is never a virtue.
Poverty is not what we want. Yes.
So I would agree that moving from an economy of scarcity to one of abundance is, of course, the key aspect. But the question is India witnessing Amrit Kaal? I don't think we are in Amrit Kaal yet. Amrit Kaal is a goal. 2047, let's say, is when we can aim to achieve genuinely Amrit Kaal. And what I mean by what I understand it to be is abundance in the sense that we not only achieve abundance for the urban elites, but for the great masses of people. And if anything, the last 9 years, we have made some enormous progress in that direction. And in the period since 1991, we began to make progress in that direction as well. But if you look back in history, when Megasthenes came to India at the time of Chandragupta Maurya, at that time, India was an Amrit Kaal. And as he described it, in fact, he described it in such glowing terms that historians of the Marxist era entirely discounted what he had written. Indica was discounted because it was such a glowing report about the Indian past. And the same sort of report was provided by Fashian when he visited the Guptas. So we have had Amrit Kaal in the past where all citizens had essentially free healthcare. We can essentially get to that point, but in order to get there, we need abundance. We need far more of employment generation. So I think if you look at India's successes, our technology has improved dramatically. There's still lots more that can be achieved. But where we have entirely failed is in labor-intensive manufacturing. And if you don't have labor-intensive manufacturing, then you don't employ hundreds of millions of people in gainful jobs. And until you do that, you're never really going to achieve true abundance for all. So I think the absence of labor-intensive manufacturing is a big lacuna that prevents us from calling this era Amrit Kaal.
Right. So I'm understanding that we and this growth versus inequality. I'm going to come just after the first few comments are over. It's a very important point that you have raised of growth versus inequality. But I think the panel is agreeing, and the room probably will, that Amrit Kaal is very deeply linked to economics. It is linked to India beginning this journey towards abundance. And as you said just now, that India actually was over 30% of the world export, world trade came from India literally thousands of years ago. So from that time, where today we are less than, I think, 3%, it's been a whole decline in our share also of global trade. So from that Amrit Kaal, the road towards what we think of is economic abundance for all. The opportunity for all should be there so that anybody who desires to get there should not be denied that opportunity. And that comes with a whole lot of changes that we need. And Gautamji, I want to ask you, your fascinating book, India 2.0, what are the 3 key constitutional changes we need to manifest this Amrit Kaal? Because as we agreeing that it is not manifest yet, it's a road towards it.
Thank you, Monika ji. The book she refers to, of course, is Bharat India 2.0 that I spoke about in Pondy 6 months ago, and copies of which are available outside there. Now, 3 key changes. The reason I feel that it's like a computer where the operating system is not good. So, however good the software is, and you people are talking about the software, if the operating system itself is not good, there's going to be a limit as to what you can achieve. You know, you spoke about methodology. I am speaking about strategy itself. How do we implement
the three constitutional changes? So we agree that unless we make these changes, let's identify these.
3 changes, point-wise. I think first thing is that there needs to be a first question before that also. Can we do it by just amending and altering the existing constitution? Or do we need an entirely new document? And I am of the latter opinion. I feel that with all these amendments and so on, it is, Vishnuji spoke about this yesterday, that it's impossible it's gone so bad that it's better to change the whole thing completely, de novo.
But in your opinion, so that is a very long road and there's a whole lot of obstacles on that road. But suppose we were to say you have Vardhan of 3 changes.
Okay,
suppose.
now, see, if you are saying 3 changes. My first problem with 3 changes is existing thing is incapable of further meaningful change. It's gone so bad. But whether we want the present 3 changes, okay, if you want 3 changes, which itself will be difficult to do, Articles 15, 16, 25, 2 especially, 26, 29, 30, this has to be completely relooked.
Briefly, could you tell us some of the provisions?
These mostly have to do with the rights and duties, mostly rights of religious minorities in the country. So, in a broad context, that is what I am talking about. And the fact that the present laws are quite unevenly distributed. Unless you feel, why did everybody stand up yesterday and start cheering Vishnuji? It was a spontaneous, heartfelt thing,
And that is linked to GDP and economic growth.
It is up to a point.
Can you make that link for the audience?
See, what is going to happen is if you take a quantitative thing with all the present good things being done by the government for GDP, etc., it will go like this. There will be a small inflection point and then again it will sit there. But it will not go to that exponential thing.
But how is changing anything to do with minorities?
Because we will all feel like stakeholders in what I call Bharat.
Without changing the status of minorities, are you saying that we are not stakeholders? I think we are stakeholders.
We are stakeholders, but we will feel fully part of we will not feel like even talking about the government. We will all be the government. We will all be part of the...
If we leave the minority issue aside.
Okay, well, that you said 3 points, so that's the first one. Second point is, I have asked for 75 small states, which can be done with Article 3 of the present Constitution.
The number of states, you need smaller governing structures so that it is easier to
And this
manage.
comes straight to your GDP issue, because a smaller state with one niche product in the state will become an economic powerhouse. So you will get 75 economic powerhouses.
And you don't think 75 more bureaucracies will add to my taxpayer burden? Like as a taxpayer, the minute you say 75, I'm thinking, oh my God, another chief minister, his office, his house.
That comes to the third point. The third point is, and this is where you need a deeper amendment, going away from a parliamentary system where we have overlap between executive and legislature. So if we have executive and legislature separate with an elected president and elected governors, no more chief ministers and all that. So the fellow who makes the law is not the fellow who is implementing the law.
Do you think third term Modi 3.0 can do it?
No.
Yogi 4.1.0?
Some weak chances there.
Weak chances there. Okay, Ashokji. We all have this combined dream of prosperous Bharat. But we should have had this dream in 1947. So it is such a missed opportunity when our neighbor has gone to $12,000 per capita income. I am still at $2,000 at very similar population levels. What are some of the mistakes? What did we do wrong? Because the mistakes are important, so we don't repeat them. So very briefly, what kind of mistakes do you think we did? And then all of us know what not to do.
In 1947, we did have the dream, or at least it was stated that we want to do all the things that
Could you please?
do all the things that are required to be done. The very fact is, okay, although the dream was there, it was nothing happened, because by the same time there were plans or procedure, whatever was there to achieve it. And that is something that we need to sit and we miss. I don't mean we here, the members of the panel, but we as a nation, we need to sit and analyze. Okay, what we did wrong. The biggest thing I think what we did wrong is that we continued to have a state of governance which was based on the colonial system, which is lack of trust. It is, I would not call it a British system or English system. It is a colonial system. And everywhere, all over the world, colonies did have that type of government, because a colony can never trust the people that it is colonizing. That's by definition. So you made those laws, and we continued with those laws, and and in fact, if anything, where other countries also did similar things in the 1950s, but when they found that it was not working out in 1960, they changed it. In 1960, what did we do? We said, we have not controlled enough, and we made the laws more and more particular, redundant, or very strict, Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act came in around about 1962 or 63. It was during the Indira Gandhi era.
One is essentially the DNA of the entire, all the acts. The laws have a DNA of a colonial master, and I completely agree. I come from the financial sector, and when I open, for example, something as mundane as an insurance act, what they did then? So insurance products were an extractive way to fund the Queen's bonds. All that we did, geniuses that we were, we replaced Queen with Government of India. So in the DNA, it remained extractive and unfair. It just changed the name. So I completely resonate with what you're saying. What other mistakes do we? This is one thing which we need to correct, even in terms of the way the police looks at citizens. It is a colonial mindset.
But all that emanates from this one fact that you don't trust.
So what else? Yes.
Continuing on what Chowgule ji said, one should not be unkind to the people in charge at the moment of independence, because it was traumatic, it was very sudden, and there was a partition thing. We had
70 years.
No, but yes. I think the mistake was made in the 60s when, unlike many other countries who changed, we still remained prisoners of the Government of India Act 1935. And the present constitution, which we have referred to, of the 395 articles, fully 250 of them are copies of that 35 Act, or almost copies.
I would like to add one thing. I would not be as charitable as you are at the time of 1947. This one, we did know. I mean, in fact, if one were to see there was about 1919, there was a commission that the British government had said about how to industrialize industrialize the country. And there was a dissent report made on that by Madan Mohan Malviya. In fact, when I saw that report, when I read that report, which was about some 15 years ago, I mean, it was not part of our consciousness. And I said to myself, if this document was available to us in 1947, we would have a 180-degree particular turnaround than what Mahanala tried to do. So as I said, I was not being that charitable.
I
wanted to come to you. Yeah.
I completely agree on this point, and the basic point is that the Government of India Act of 1935 was meant to control India.
Correct.
Not that. I mean, so essentially, the nature of governance in India under the British was based on control, not on developing the country. So even today, if you go to a DM's office, I mean, as I've been, you see that the DM, Mr. or Mrs., is like the king or queen of the district, and there's an audience of siparishkaris who are there to basically put in their petitions.
Beg for.
So, but the actual task is to try and develop the area, not to rule.
Even in terms
We
of
essentially have now what we have is these people spend their entire career in the districts like this, and then they come to the center. They have 3 years as joint secretary, during which they acquire, by the end of the third year, they acquire a bit of expertise, and then they get transferred. And then they become secretary of the Government of India for about 1.5 years at the end. So we have no expertise in governance. Absolutely none.
We are saying that bureaucracy also is a part of a problem. And also, just to take forward your point, it's what is even in the names, it's a district collector. He's a collector. She's a collector of what? Tax. But Prasenjit, I want to ask you. So we are talking of Amrit Kaal, and you also said, and we all know that there was an Amrit Kaal sent thousands of years ago. What are the characteristics through your sweep of history? Are we seeing something similar? Are there green shoots of evidence that indeed we can dream of an Amrit Kaal, looking at the evidence from the past?
See, there are many green shoots. I mean, there are many bits of evidence of enormous success in India. But the really missing aspect, I mean, I think you alluded to our neighbor, the northern neighbor, as being an example of a country that has achieved far more success in terms of economic growth in the last 40 years than we have. But I would say that China merely adopted some of the features, not all, the features of a truly successful Asian economy. So if you look at the history of the last 100 years, there have been basically 3 economies that have gone from being developing to fully prosperous. Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. And to some degree, Singapore, Malaysia are also, could be included there. But Singapore is very tiny. It's a city-state. And Israel. But really, where Japan succeeded, at the end of the Second World War, Japan, and my other point in my book was that the parts of Asia that Japan ruled have turned out to be the most successful. And the only parts of China that are industrialized are precisely those that Japan ruled. So there's something in the Japanese model that is worth emulating. And I think that begins with, of course, altering the nature of the technocracy or bureaucracy that runs the place. That's an important aspect. But the basic features, first of all, is to have full employment. Employ everybody. How do you do that? By beginning with labor-intensive manufacturing. I mean, if you look at even Britain's Industrial Revolution, it was based on labor-intensive manufacturing, producing clothes for the world, clothes and shoes. Now, if you think about this, at all times, everybody needs to wear clothes. So the demand for clothes is really very large. And if you begin with textile, garment, shoes, toys, this sort of manufacturing, the demand is enormous. Every country that has succeeded has done it except us. So we have succeeded in many other things. We are the second biggest steel, aluminium, cement producer in the world. We are the 4th largest producer of cars in the world. We are the 8th or 9th largest pharmaceutical exporter in the world. So there are many areas of success in manufacturing. We, as a software exporter, we are world leaders. So there are many areas of enormous success. But the area that we have completely missed the boat on is textiles and garments. Now, if you look back in history, when the British came to India and the Dutch, they came to a country that was the clothier to the world. Throughout history, we were the clothier to the world. We suddenly stopped being the clothier to the world after the Second World War. After we became so-called independent, Nehruvian policy utterly destroyed our textile garment sector by attempting to be a capital-intensive producer of
No, I want to interject
and so,
just on one point.
and also autarky. Autarky
right.
closed economy.
So I'm hearing from you, you're saying that we need full employment, we need jobs, we need wages. Now, my problem is that India now, 2020, 21, we are also in this whole phase of growth along with redistribution. And this is open to the panel, whoever wants to take it. I'm saying it is such a dais loaded against me as a country because there is free food, there are freebies in the states, the wage problem. So it's not an employment problem anymore, it's a wage problem. There is a certain level of money below which people are not willing to work. All of these economies have been built on extremely low wage base. We don't have that anymore. So it's open to the panel that how do you compete now in a world where the politics of the country is giving you almost a minimum income in terms of either kind or cash or both? Open to the panel.
See, I fear that it is not enough. I mean, in the education sector where I'm directly involved, we have also been living in a scarcity economy simply because the number of seats available to people who want to study is still drastically limited. So in such a situation, people will resort to all kinds of unofficial means of getting educated. And so they are lacking a basic education in certain core areas and disciplines. How can you expect and hope to get a big economic revolution, however nice the rules and regulations are, if the basic raw material is not able to handle something like this and take up the challenge? So that scarcity mentality is still there. And you talk about these funny names. One of the richest bodies in our country is called the Board of Control for Cricket in India. That control word still comes. And so the idea of somebody controlling somebody, I think this is actually anti-democratic in the end, if you ask me at a deeper level. And yes, I think that this is why I feel that we are smelling Amrit Kaal, but I am not tasting it as yet.
Okay. So, I think the point that you're making is that when we have a wage level as it is today, because of all these other things, and the point that you made over there, that whether people really want to work when they get all these type of freebies. I mean, we do experience, like in Goa, a lot of the young people always are angling for a government job. And even if somebody comes to me and says, okay, I have an opening in the company. Okay, you have the qualifications. You can come and work here. No, can you give me a letter so that speak to this minister or that minister and see whether I can get a government job? It's a real issue. At the same time, okay, we have to live with it at least for some time to come. And I hope, okay, things will.
Why is then the government such a soft employer?
Whatever it is, I think, you can see that it's the nature of politics that comes about. And if
but I'm the taxpayer, I'm paying, I don't like it.
Sorry?
I said, as a taxpayer, I don't like it. Why should I pay for somebody else's inefficiency?
No, I 100% agree with you, but you just look at today, the analysis that was made about the violence that happened in the West Bengal Panchayat elections. And that violence, was actually justified even in a publication like The Economist, saying that, you want to capture the Panchayat, because Panchayat has got, this dispensation of patronage that gives you this particular privilege. It's such an absurd example in a way to put forward. You can still capture the particular Panchayat without going through the violence. And you don't see that violence anywhere else in any other state in the world. But it is justified that, and even I don't know who in The Economist, wrote that article, justifying that. But again, as I said, what do you do with it? I really don't know. But the thing,
to come back to your basic point about whether or not there are enough people available to employ in labor-intensive manufacturing. Absolutely there are. I mean, I think if you look at just the average productivity of a person in a textile or garment factory is about 5 to 10 times what the average productivity of an agricultural worker is. Leave alone the marginal productivity. The marginal productivity is probably zero for many people in the agriculture sector. So if you transfer people from basic agriculture work to even the most basic form of textile, garment, toy manufacturing, productivity will increase dramatically, and therefore the compensation will increase dramatically. You may not necessarily have 3 times the wage, but you might not have 5 or 10 times the wage. You'll have maybe 3 to 6 times the wage. But a substantial increase in compensation and in sustained work of that kind, which of course induces discipline, etc. Now, I think there are many other aspects that can be brought in. We have a moral malaise, this, that, and the other. But the point is that labor-intensive manufacturing has worked for so many other places. There is no reason why it shouldn't work for us. The tragedy is that in every decade since independence, there have always been some economists, usually Bengali, who make the case that labor-intensive manufacturing is not for us. We can do other things, but somehow we will not do labor-intensive manufacturing. The latest one is Raghuram Rajan is currently now, not a Bengali, making the case that manufacturing is not for us. Even chip manufacturing is not for us. Maybe we should just do chip design. Forget about manufacturing. And I think he's disingenuous because he just wants to criticize anything that this government is doing, and therefore production-linked incentives are his current bugbear, and therefore that's being attacked. But labor-intensive manufacturing in particular, and of course, the other area of manufacturing where India has been absent is in technology, electronics, semiconductors, which is where Southeast Asia led the way. Now, so those are 2 areas that are missing, but in the middle, we've actually done quite well as a manufacturer, and we've done quite well as a service provider. So there's many aspects of the economy that India has done very well in, but the last serious lacuna is labor intensive.
So again, from your point of labor intensive to the earlier point that you made, I'm coming to this. We are agreeing that growth is key. We need to grow. There is growth with redistribution happening. We need large-scale factories. You need large-scale employment generators. But you have 2 institutions who come and stand in the way, which is the judiciary and the bureaucracy. So there is a whole set of, we can call them NGOs, but the minute there is an announcement of a large factory coming up, we know what kind of activity starts to happen. Again, open to the panel. How are we going to do land acquisition? How are we going to set up these large factories? The people who are going to get employment, who's going to educate them that it's far better for you to get this employment rather than hold the placards and say down with XYZ?
Monika ji, this is why I said that we need a new constitution. You cannot do it with the existing thing. But if you want to stick within the existing and keep incremental, I think Keshavananda Bharati needs to be looked at. And because that is the thing that got the judiciary into this now presently activist mode, that they are willing to take suo moto cognizance of whatever they want and do whatever they like. And the Freedom of Expression Act, Article 19, is again being misused by the judiciary. So that is the same. The other thing, the bureaucracy, it is a real problem. I can tell you because I have dealt with the Department of Science and Technology for the last 40 years. It is a real problem. And the Government of India 35 Act, last year you might remember some 200 awards, science awards, were scrapped by the Modi government. And people thought that this was going to be a new era of awardless science. For some time, let's forget about these awards. Today, I'm told that there are about 50 new awards that are simply clones of the old ones. And they're called Vigyan this, Vigyan Ratna, Vigyan something, Vigyan. something else or the other. So they're just some different names. And guess who are the people who are going to decide these awards? The 5 secretaries of the science departments, the principal scientific advisor to the government of India. So again, the same lot of fellows who have been sitting and doing nothing are again going to decide some nothings to give these nothing awards. So you see, it goes on, like around and round we go, merry-go-round. So this is the problem, and that's why I feel we need a break.
Identifying this, Ashokji, headwinds to Amrit Kaal. Are we correct to say it is judiciary and bureaucracy? And then, if it is true, what do you do about that?
Yeah, the obstacles are there, and the two you talked about, bureaucracy and the judiciary. But again, why is this thing happening? Again, coming back to these things, I think we have to go back to the trust. Take for example, you talk about Land Acquisition Act. What is the basis of that Land Acquisition Act? That if you were to freely tell anybody that I got particular land, I want to convert the use of it to whatever I want, either the owner of that land. A large amount of land will go from agriculture to non-agriculture, and there will be, food scarcity. That is the basis of that act, the starting point assumption. I think Dr. Shamika Ravi had written an article on that particular subject. But this is essentially false, because the land that is acquired or used from the industry is some 7% of our total land mass. And from 1991, when the industry, there was an industrialization happening, that has happened. Not happened enough is a separate issue, but it has happened. From 7%, it has gone to 8%. But there are people like these NGOs that you talk about. The NGOs are really a serious particular problem, on many, many aspects of this. There's one particular person that is there, who's, his name always skips my mind, where he made a statement, on a national television, that if you allow, all this, land, conversion of land, 30% of the land in UP will go to non-agriculture. Absurd particular statement. Somebody comes and stands up and nobody is there to question it. And I really want to do it to these things. I think what Gautam ji has recently come out with that document on the decriminalization of the acts. And, it is something that really needs to be done.
Prasenjit, again, headwinds and your experience of history. See, there is always going to be a balance and a struggle for power between the three wings. Are we at a point when these two are going to be a little tamed?
No, this is why I feel we need a complete separation of the three wings. You cannot have overlap. The moment you have one wing usurping the function of the other, officially or unofficially, you're going to get into trouble.
Yeah, I think the judiciary is an impediment in many ways, but I don't think it is such a binding constraint on economic growth and success. Broadly, I don't think the judiciary stands in the way of economic progress. Now, in terms of land acquisition, for instance, yes, if a private industrialist or multinational tries to acquire land through the normal process, it's a bit difficult. But we have a process of competition among the states. If you really begin to see, for instance, if you see the semiconductor sector, land was found in Gujarat, land was found in Karnataka, in Tamil Nadu. So a number of states began to compete for that prized investment, just as many states competed for the when the nano project came along. So if there are sufficiently attractive investment ideas, the land constraint can easily be overcome, and it's usually overcome by the states. The state governments have lots of surplus land. The state governments own it. The public enterprises have a lot of potential surplus land. So there's enough. I think there's more than enough land for the purposes of industry. I don't think that's a constraint. I think the attitude needs to change. In particular, the labor laws that were passed by Parliament, signed by the President in September, October 2020. It's now been 3 years. They haven't yet been notified. India is a remarkable country. Law is passed and it takes 5. One dramatic one was the abolition of the Benami Transactions Act, which happened. It was passed by Parliament in 1988. It was finally notified in 2016, September 2016, after 28 years. So, in that period, those 28 years, all the Benami transactions that needed to happen.
Transactions happen.
So, the point is, with the labor laws aren't perfect, but they are a huge advance on the past. And in particular, they provide a workaround for the problems with firing workers. If you can't fire workers, you don't hire them. So that's basically the problem that India has had. So if you look at, say, Bajaj Auto today produces about 20 times the number of two-wheelers that they did 20 years ago, but they employ 1/3 the number of workers. So in a labor-abundant country, our corporates choose labor-saving technology because of the incentive structure. The incentive structure is so messed up that they choose labor-saving. Instead, if we can change the labor, now the changes that they provide is that they provide for contract work. So, an employer can employ someone for, say, a 3-year period, and when the 3-year term of employment ends, employment is over. So that basically overcomes the need to fire workers and thereby provides a workaround. But the point is that the labor laws are a huge advance. They were the right thing to do. They were in the BJP manifesto of 2014. They took 6 years to do it, 6.5 years, but they actually got it passed by Parliament. But they haven't yet notified. Some states have apparently notified it, but the central government hasn't, and all states haven't. So now the point is that if a few states do it, and you begin to see large scale, if you say, the likes of Gap or the likes of Uniqlo put in a big, 100,000 worker manufacturing plant for textiles.
Right. So the state's point is very, very important. I mean, when you start looking at the headwind and you look at the state competition, I think that's immediately potential for more growth, at least in those states. Yes. And then I want to come to one last point before I open it up.
On the land acquisition, that is, you talked about, what can be called, say, big ticket items. But there are a lot of people, small people, in fact, many of them could be a supplier to those, the small and medium ones. We have a particular experience ourselves. There's a land, next to an industrial estate which we have acquired, but it took us a long time to get it out of this particular notification because it was classified as an agricultural land. But but nothing was happening as far as agriculture was concerned for 10 years. So these small things that are there, which we should not dismiss.
So I want to actually move to this last topic, and then I want to open it up to questions. We are agreeing that Amrit Kaal is linked to growth is linked to GDP. The one criticism that I hear very often is that, India is growing, GDP is growing, but look at the inequality. You are a very unequal society, and as growth is starting, I just want to read out some statistics. There is a way to measure inequality. Economists use something called the Gini coefficient, where when it is 100, all the wealth is owned by one person. When it is 1, all the wealth is distributed equally. India's metric is 35.7, and the global norm is if you're managing to be below 40, you're doing okay. Gini coefficients of countries like America and Indonesia and Brazil are much higher than India's Gini coefficient. Inequality there is much, much higher.
China too.
The other piece of data is that, the other thing they say, the poor are dying. I have data to say that 217 deaths by starvation in 2012. From 2016 onwards, the number of starvation deaths in India is 0. There has been no starvation, and this is international data, not Indian data. Poverty indices. 1987, 50% of the population is less than $2 a day per person. That number is now in single digits. Whether it's a 6% or an 8% depends on whose data you use. But the number of the extreme poverty has dropped drastically. So this, I want to open it quickly to the panel and then maybe to the audience to say that when you grow, there is going to be the people who are better off are going to do better. But it is also true that we are solving the problem of extreme poverty, and there is a transition happening to a middle income India, and which is where the Amrit Kaal goes, that we become a middle income country.
I'd like to say something in this context. One must make allowance for the fact that as a country is growing rapidly economically, there will be an interim phase where the income disparities will be high. They must be high. At that point, if the government artificially tries to reduce this gap, it is again putting a spoke in its own wheel. So I think this is something that we should be aware of, and we cannot expect that equality thing to go on throughout as the country is growing faster.
Quick comments on this growth versus inequality.
Yeah.
How much inequality can we tolerate?
I don't think you can put a number to it, but and I don't need to put a number to it. I think it's just that inequality is a fact of life, and I think as you yourself read from the various particular statistics, on the same basis on which India is compared, not on another particular measurement. So I think it's a debate that is futile. I mean, I think whether
this is what you hear from the West.
I know that's what
unequal. So I'm challenging on that. That is it really such a problem? I don't think so.
My point. That's what I'm saying. It's a futile debate over there. You see. So it is there. I mean, in fact, sometimes you got all these equality labs and all those things that are there. And if you look at the people working in the equality lab, they're probably the higher particular percentages. Is one of the ironies that are there that happens.
Two quick points. First of all, if you look at Japan, Korea, Taiwan, their levels of inequality are lower than China, much lower. So the labor-intensive, focused manufacturing model actually reduces inequality. That's one very important point. That interestingly, China moved away from labor-intensive manufacturing quicker than they should have, and so China actually has much more inequality even now than Japan does. And Japan is a very, we might think that Japan is a small country. It's not a small country. The density of population in Japan is higher than India even now, believe it or not. Now, the point is, the second thing, I think where India has reduced inequality over the last 9 years quite dramatically is because of this government's focus on providing the basics of humanity, the basics of civilization to all citizens. So, I mean, I think it is a scandal that in 2014, half of our people, half of the citizens of this country did not have a bank account, didn't have basic access to the financial system. They didn't have, more than half of our people, over 60% of our population had no access to a toilet, didn't have access to cooking gas. So all of this, it might seem, now I'm of course speaking to the converted here. So the fact that this has been provided, now the fact that we have near universal access to bank accounts, toilets, cooking gas, is transformative. Basically, it provides all our people the ability to live civilized lives. I remember my Japanese boss about 15 years ago saying to me that I find that in this country about half the people live like animals. And I was about to sock him, literally, but then I thought to myself that, there is truth to the fact that the basics of a civilized existence didn't exist for the vast majority of our people. That has been provided by this government over the last 9 years. And so we have much to celebrate. And in terms of poverty indices, this work by Sujit Bhalla and co showed that poverty in India is down to about 2%. Now you might say maybe it's 5 or 6%, whatever it is. It's a substantial, the biggest reduction in poverty in human history has been accomplished by this government in the last 9 years through policies that are supposedly right-wing, but that achieve the outcomes that the socialists wanted but never knew how to achieve. So we have achieved those so-called socialist outcomes through a right-wing.
Thank you. That was really very, very educative. I'm going to open it up to the audience. Please give me your name and the panelist, gentleman here and the lady over there. Yes.
Can I ask?
Yes.
Can I ask? One is open.
Yes, please.
So I have 3 outcomes in my mind when I look at Amrit Kaal. So I want you to comment whether it is practical, it is going to happen. Number 1, embassies of India across the world have lines outside them for people trying to come to India to work, to study and to live. Number 2, INR becomes the reserve currency, at least 50% of the world reserve. Just as a reference, 60% is the dollar number. The total reserves in the world are 60% dollar. And third, the next Elon Musk comes from India. I think if these 3 things were to happen,
Elon Musk comes from India. Musk comes from
so
India.
These are like the KPIs. We say in telecom, ARPU, you pick one number, everything else falls around it. So these are my 3 indicators. My question, especially to Mr. Desiraju, is, do you think we will achieve this?
If the government does everything extremely carefully and we are helped with a little bit of luck here and there, by 2047, all these 3 should be possible.
Amrit Kaal will arrive by then. Okay, lady over there. Yes.
Professor Desiraju, I wanted to ask you the position of the minorities or the reservations which they have. What is their state in the Amrit Kaal?
See, all these reservations, in the end, keeping the discussion that we have had in mind for the last 1 hour, reservations are an outcome of a scarcity economy. Because if there was no scarcity, there would not be any need for reservations. I view all this as a transitional phase. When India becomes 7 or 8 trillion by 2030, shall we say, I feel many of these issues and concerns will they'll have a natural death at that point.
Okay. All right. So I think maybe last 2 questions. Yes.
So I want Monika ji to answer my question. If we see the bare facts, China had the backing of US, and Japan, even after the bombings, had the backing of US in order to become whatever the giants in their own spaces. Does India have anyone to back, capitally, technologically? We have the resources, technologically.
So in terms of backing, you are saying who's backing India?
Yes.
I think today, other than the dictatorships, everybody else is backing India because they see India as the democratic buffer between the rogue state of China and what it can unleash on the world. So I think the whole world, other than the dictatorship and the fascist states of the world, are backing India. Yes?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Make a small point, please. In keeping with the earlier comment, talking about India versus China, because I feel this will be the competition of the future. We do have this one big asset that China does not have, and that is the English language. As long as we keep that
and democracy.
We need our version of democracy, but shall we say democracy? But I think the English language is a very potent weapon we've got, and as long as we have this along with a 7 or 8 trillion, there's nothing that will stop us.
I think in terms of backing, we definitely have the backing of the US. It's not an unconditional backing, but it's about as close as possible. Now, if you think about 1978, when China began its economic reforms, yes, they absolutely had the backing of the US. And the interest had so much backing, in fact, that the United States supported the rogues that China backed. Pol Pot was supported by the US as the legitimate government of Cambodia. Yahya Khan before that in 1971, the atrocities that he perpetrated, he killed 3 million Bangladeshis, most of whom were Hindus. I'd say maybe 2.5 million. And he was supported hilt by the United States right through. And who was he? Actually a proxy for China. So China, of course, managed to get this degree of support. The US is not going to give us that. The US doesn't support our plans. We don't support rogues. So we don't have that need. But where we do have need is for investment to be attractive, for companies from all over the world to look to India as a manufacturing base, as a service provider. And politically speaking, the backing definitely exists now from the United States and Japan. And the Quad is the best manifestation of that. We absolutely should commit to the Quad, not only as a strategic defense arrangement, but as an economic one as well. And in fact, a lot of what the Quad is doing and what the IPEF is doing, the Indo-Pacific Economic Foundation, whatever it's called, IPEF framework for peace, that all of that is absolutely to our advantage, and we need to take advantage fully of the opportunities that are emerging from the Quad and the Indo-Pacific process.
Last comments and then we'll wrap.
I fully agree with what Prasenjit ji has said. I'd just like to add one thing. When we talked about the backing of America to China, what did China do with that backing? I think they flouted every particular rule of WTO. In fact, WTO, which was supposed to be a rule-based order, they flouted everything over there of those things and came to the position at which they are today. And because of this so-called backing of this America and other countries, everybody turned a blind eye to that, to that system. And in countries like us, not just only India, but other countries, because of the way they flouted those particular rules, we all became at a disadvantage because the way they controlled their currency and made everybody else uncompetitive because the way they control. We must not forget that. Every time we talk about the backing about China, we use the example of earlier also we talked about the way China has done things. China has done things, because they were allowed to get away with it.
Right, thank you. I think we are out of time. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to the audience.